This is the Ground and Pound Cast. My name is Vince, and I am here with Rick, and we are so excited after watching some awesome fights, or at the very least, one really good fight last night as we watched Jean Silva face Diego Lopes. I'm seeing a lot of people online saying this was the fight of the year. I think they might be jumping the gun on that, but it was a really good fight. It's a very exciting fight. Rick, just tell me your general thoughts on this fight. What do you think?
Oh, that definitely was one of the fights of the year. I wouldn't say it was the fight of the year. I think it's top five-ish, top 10, worst case. Regardless, super entertaining, super exciting, a back and forth. Any fight where you see a guy have a big advantage, right, like we did in Lopes in that first round, where he's on top in the full mount. He's raining down the elbows. At one point, the announcer even said he'd be a miracle if he got through this round. To a second round where Lopes gets rocked by Silva a couple different times. To, of course, him having his spinning back elbow. Just every component of it was very exciting. The back and forth made for a great fight.
Yeah, I think the biggest difference in this fight was actually the grappling here. A lot of people really touted Jean Silva on his grappling because he was able to get that ninja choke on Bryce Mitchell, and everybody knows Bryce Mitchell is a really high-level jiu-jitsu practitioner, and Jean Silva made it look easy. And so a lot of people thought that Silva would actually have a grappling advantage over Diego Lopes, but as we saw, that was not the case. If you actually look at Diego Lopes' record, he's kind of like, and I've described Ilia Topuria in the same way, and I'm not trying to compare Lopes to Topuria, but I'm just saying, when you look at the last handful of fights, you kind of have in your mind, you have an idea of the kind of fighting style they have, and you think that's all that they bring to the table. So you look at the last handful of fights by Diego Lopes and by Ilia Topuria, and it's like boxing. They just come at you with the punches, and you forget that both these guys have more submission wins than they have knockout wins. They actually have more of a grappling base. So I think a lot of people, including Jean Silva, underestimated Diego Lopes' grappling in this. People also seem to forget that Alexa Grasso, a former champion, a recent champion, women's champion, her jiu-jitsu coach is Diego Lopes. So this guy's grappling. In one of the opening exchanges, he ends up getting Jean Silva down on the ground the first round, and I was borderline going to call it a 10-8 if it wasn't for the fact that Silva was able to get up towards the end of that first round and return at least a little bit of fire. It doesn't mean he was even close to winning that round. If he would have not gotten up and would have continued taking those elbows, I would have probably called that a 10-8. He barely survives just enough to make it a 10-9. And then he comes back in the second round, Silva that is, and he actually is able to put together some good boxing combos of his own, and he's doing pretty well. But then there's a couple of grappling exchanges, and that's whenever Lopes started taking back over. And I think that was probably the biggest difference between the two, is Lopes was able to use the grappling to take control of Silva, and I think that's ultimately what led to the win.
Yeah, no, I'd agree. I believe Silva had the better of the exchanges on the feet, and he's very creative. You know, a lot of those spinning back elbows, and he was coming from different angles, but not to mention just his straight boxing, you know, whether it was the jab or the overhands, the hooks. I did feel like he had the advantage, but again, once they locked up, Diego took him to the mat and did it a couple times there in the second round, just kind of ragdolled him a little bit. Seemed like once he got his hands on him, that's where he was most comfortable. And when I look at this fight, I look at Diego Lopes, who to me has something to prove, right? Diego Lopes had that fight with Volkanovski, and he just looked outmatched, like maybe it wasn't his time, and that happens. There's young prospects all the time that move up, and maybe it's just a little too early, and they fight their way back into title shots. We've seen Max Holloway do that when he was coming up, for example. But when I look at Lopes here, you know, he had the Dan Ige fight. Dan Ige had 4 hours of notice. You know, and that was a struggle. And I know there was some weight cutting going on and weight fluctuation. But nonetheless, to me, he had something to prove. Silva was a big-time prospect. He was favored to win this match. You know, he comes in hot. The Fighting Nerds, which I know we can get into here shortly, you know, they came in with all this hype over the last couple weeks. It's diminished, but nonetheless, it's a great fight camp. I still believe that. And he came in there looking to prove something, and Diego wasn't having anything to do with it. He won in a very, I guess what I say, a very convincing fashion. You know, when you can stand there and withstand all of Silva's output and then be able to drag him where you want to go to the mat. Let's not forget, he's a Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu black belt. Diego Lopes has his own gym. To your point, he coached Alexa Grasso to a championship. He's very well versed on the ground, but he was able to get it done. He was able to withstand that firepower. Silva actually got a little too aggressive. If you noticed in the first round when he went for one of those spinning back elbows, that's where he got taken down the first time. And for Diego to be able to recognize that and jump on it, that strikes me as something he saw maybe like looking at some fight tape, and he said, oh, this is a tendency. And we noticed in that second round, Silva kept coming with those elbows. But when you do that, you expose your back, and you can get taken to the mat, and that's exactly what he did.
Right. And you mentioned the Volkanovski fight. I actually think that played a big part in why Diego Lopes was able to win this match. Whenever these fights were coming up, I didn't actually take the time to do official predictions for the whole card, but I did say that I thought Diego Lopes was going to win this fight. And the reason why is because he just lost to Volkanovski. He made it to the very top and fell short. And a lot of times when you see a really good fighter, really good prospect like this, I use GSP as a perfect example of this. That's whenever they level up, they find what they need to do to patch the holes in their game. You look at when GSP was on a pretty good tear early in his career. Faces, who was the champ at the time, Matt Hughes, he gets submitted by Matt Hughes. And then he's like, okay, what do I need to change to level up my game to take it to the next level, to go from a good fighter to a great fighter? And that's what he's able to do. And I thought to myself, this could happen to Diego Lopes. I'm not saying he's the next GSP, because I know people are going to misquote me on that. I'm just saying that it could be the same situation where you have a guy who's had a pretty solid run up to this point, loses to Volkanovski, and he thinks to himself, okay, I made it this far. I know I can hang with the best, but I clearly had some shortcomings. What do I need to do to patch up the holes in my game so I could come back better? And I think that his Volkanovski loss gave him time to reflect and say, okay, I need to change this, I need to change that, and I'm going to come back better. And this match he had against Silva, for the most part, showed that. I still found a few weaknesses that he needs to patch up. If he wants to face Volkanovski soon, he needs to patch this up. And what I'm talking about here is his striking defense. He has really good striking offense. He has really good output. He seems to have a good stance where he keeps his hands up. Even when he's throwing punches, he doesn't drop his guard like I've seen a lot of other people do. But the problem is he doesn't really move. He doesn't change angles. He allows himself to get punched too much, and he doesn't really seem to block. He has his hands up in a good stance. You know, like I said, he doesn't drop his guard, but you still have to move your hands at least a little bit to try to block. And I noticed that whenever he was boxing Silva in that second round, when they're having those exchanges, Silva, as you pointed out, was getting the better of him. And the reason why is because he wasn't even attempting to block. He had almost no head movement. It was still a great performance, but when you still have those little mistakes and you go against the best like Volkanovski, that's going to bite you. You're going to have to patch that up. So as good of a performance as that was, he still needs to tweak a little things to get a little bit tighter with his striking exchanges if he does want to hang with the best. So what do you think? Do you think he's ready for Volkanovski, or do you think maybe he needs one more tune-up fight? What do you think?
As he said last night, if they want to give him another fight before a title, he would be okay with it. I guess you just have to kind of to look and see. The Volkanovski fight, that was only in April, so it was only a few months ago, and it does look like he's advanced his game, like I was just saying. But is he ready to jump right back in there? I don't know. Who do we have at featherweight right now? I guess I should have had that pulled up.
I'm pulling that up myself. I already think that I know who he should fight next, and it's not Volkanovski. The question is who should fight Volkanovski instead? Maybe Movsar Evlov? I have a hard time pronouncing these names. That's not going to change on this podcast.
No, that's guaranteed to happen. We're going to butcher names. Evlov is a guy who doesn't fight a lot. So to me, he still has something to prove. I have to find out the last time he fought. I think it was about a couple years ago, though. Right. Let me see here. All right, I got to pull it up here. Evlov, he fought Aljamain Sterling back in December of last year at UFC 310. He won by unanimous decision. Interestingly enough, his last couple opponents going back, Arnold Allen and Diego Lopes. So does Diego Lopes need to rematch Evlov? Evlov, he's been out. It'll be close to a year. I don't know that he has his next fight even signed. Maybe they throw those two guys together, winner takes Volk, but Volk's a guy who typically likes to stay busy. Does Volk want to wait around that long? Volk's getting older. These days are going by. Time is precious. It's of the essence. Do they go ahead and throw Lerone Murphy in there? Is he the next guy? A lot of people have been saying he's the next guy for Volk. I could easily see that. Very deserving, undefeated fighter. How do you feel about it?
So I actually have a different fighter in mind.
Okay.
So instead of Diego Lopes trying to avenge that one loss that he had early in his career against a guy who's barely been active since then, you have a guy who's been on a pretty decent tear lately, he's already lost to Volkanovski, but he's trying to get another shot at him. And him and Diego Lopes already have some beef. I think you need to put Diego Lopes against Yair Rodriguez. And I think make that a title eliminator. Winner of that fight gets to fight Volkanovski. Or if there's another champion, I don't know if we want to keep Volk busy by giving him someone else in the meantime. But that's who I think he should fight next. Because they had that big exchange. It wasn't the last UFC Noche, was it? It was actually whenever Diego Lopes fought Volkanovski back in, was it April, I believe? And
back in April.
Right. And Yair Rodriguez and Diego Lopes
that's a natural rivalry right there.
Right. They had a big exchange. They had to get separated at the press conference. If they already have beef with each other, they both have losses to Volkanovski already. They are both trying to work their way back up to get another shot at him. I think it's perfect. Have those two face each other, make it a title eliminator, and let's give Diego Lopes a little more time to patch up the holes in his game in the process. That's what I think should happen.
Yeah, no, I like that. I like that a lot. Much like that welterweight division, where we've seen a couple different people that are in like a little mini contest to get to that championship level. I feel you could do that. You could also do Evloev versus Murphy, and kind of like another title eliminator. Maybe they face each other, or the winner of Volk and whoever wins the first match that you had mentioned. There's a couple different ways you could slice it, but one thing's for sure, I'd like to see Volk stay busy. And like I said, that's a natural rivalry with Yair. They were going back and forth. It seemed like that should have been the fight to make, even back in April. It seems like they could have just switched something up last second. People would have been happy with it. So, yeah, to put those two together, absolutely, I'd be okay with that. And then Diego, again, he's right there. Maybe he does have one more fight. Maybe, like I said, he still had some things to prove. And last night he looked great. But he did just have that title fight earlier this year, so maybe he needs a couple fights to really kind of put himself back in contention in most people's eyes. A lot of times you have guys that are really worthy, but they still want to see you kind of build your way back up. Just because you lost doesn't mean you get the automatic rematch, or even just one fight later you get back in there. So, yeah, if he gets another top 5 win, he's the guy to, put in there versus the next champion.
Right. I agree. So I'm excited to see what UFC has next in store for Diego Lopes. And also, I'm curious to know what UFC has next in store for Jean Silva.
Yeah, so that brings me to the next point. So I'm watching the fight. The fight concludes, and then all of a sudden you see Jean Silva throw a hand in the direction of the back of his head. Now, I thought he kind of shoved Lopes.
That's what it looked like to me.
And then, I watched it a couple different times, but it's the same angle. I don't know. Maybe he punched him. I'm hearing different things. But either way, it wasn't very professional. And in mixed martial arts, it's all about respect. He showed a very big lack of respect there.
Right.
And then he met with Dana White afterwards. And you have more information on that?
Not a lot. Mostly it's a rumor mill kind of thing right now, where there were some words exchanged and there's discussion of possible suspension. I don't know. At this point, it's more rumor. I haven't seen anything said officially from Dana White or the UFC or anything like that. So we'll have to wait and see how that unfolds. But let's say he doesn't get fired, like he gets suspended or no suspension or whatever. If he still sticks around to fight, what do you think's next for Silva?
So, again, Silva's got a very exciting style. He's easy to sell as far as, hey, we want somebody to, we want to put eyeballs on a main event or what have you. He could headline any of these fight night cards. People love the stand-up style, and that's what he brings to the game. With that said, it was very competitive, until he got caught with that elbow. So you could still see him in contention. I could see him facing a top 10 opponent, maybe 10 to 15 even. I know he was ranked 10 at the time, even though he was favored over the number 2 guy. Looking at the list here, Josh Emmett kind of jumps out. He's kind of a name. He's not a big name, but people in the MMA community, of course, know what he's capable of and his knockout power. Just as far as styles make fights, Josh Emmett throwing those hammers versus John Silva would just be electric. I could see that being potentially one. I don't necessarily think he gets another top 5 shot. So looking a little further down there, there's Dan Ihe again. Everybody likes him. He won me over when he fought on 4 hours notice. He's tough. He's gritty. He'll bring it.
He'll bring it unless he's in New Orleans.
Unless he's in New Orleans, yeah.
I was there. I was in the building watching that, and I told everybody this might be fight. I'm telling the people sitting to my right and my left, keep your eyes on these two. This is going to be a killer fight. And then when it's all said and done, they're both looking at me. I'm like, I'm sorry. I have no control over what they do. It's like they both had an off night, but that's another event. That's besides the point. Yeah, I could see you give him another like low top 10 or just barely outside the top 10 fight. See if he could build himself back up. And this is, of course, the big headline is you have this team called the Fighting Nerds, and it's actually there's a lot of people that are in this group, but you have 4 guys in particular that seem to be the faces. Of course, you have Caio Bahayo, I think is how you pronounce it. It's a weird one. It's the hardest one to pronounce, and I've listened to Bruce Buffer say his name, and it's still weird. And then you got Carlos Prates, João Silva, and Mauricio Hufi. And we just talked about this last week where Caio and Hufi got their first UFC losses. Prates lost a while back, two fights back. He loses. But it was a match that Prates almost won because he was down on the scorecards. But in the final round, he had Ian Gary in trouble and almost got the finish. But Ian was able to fend off Prates just enough to survive to the final bell and win by decision. If Prates would have got the finish there, we'd still have one fighting nerd with no UFC losses, and we might not even be having this conversation. But Prates has since then won with the devastating spinning back elbow, which seems to be rising in popularity in the moves list for all UFC fighters, it seems.
It's the new thing to do.
Right. So you look at Prates, you look at Caio and Hufi and Silva, all these guys have taken very recently have all lost, and those were like the main guys. Everyone's touting the Fighting Nerds as being like this unstoppable force. They are in grand total 20-something-0 between like their main guys, and they all lost back to back. Minus Prates was a little bit earlier than he's since then won. Do you think we are seeing the decline, the fall of the Fighting Nerds, or do you think this is just them they've just gone so high up in the rankings that now they're facing the very best and they're just coming up a little bit short? What do you think?
Well, it's just MMA. The more you see these guys win, the higher up they move. The higher up they move, the more difficult the competition. It's just the nature of the beast. I don't think it's really an indictment on them. In fact, I believe the fact they all have risen to such heights already is more of a feather in their cap. When you get to the top of the game, you do have these different types of finishes, though, and endings. And, it's one thing when you're on a smaller circuit, cage fighters, whatever it may be. But then you get up to the UFC and it's the big boys, and you're going to fight different guys with different styles that are excelling in all styles, but maybe they have an advantage over you in an area that you're weak in, or maybe an area that you haven't had as much practice or work. Once you get to that level as well, the development, I believe, excels, especially as you face top 10 guys. You see guys, as you just said, they fight, there's a hole in their game, they patch it up, they get better. The only way you really get better is to fight better people. Iron sharpens iron, and you see that time and time again. I still think there's a lot of positives ahead for him. The Gene Silva thing, I think his attitude and the way he carries himself could get him in trouble as far as his future with the UFC. If not, maybe now, maybe in the future if he's still around. He just seems kind of like a live wire. But Carlos Prates, his skills are undeniable. I believe he's great. Mauricio Hufi, obviously he needs to work on his ground game, but his stand-up is elite. I'd put it up there with anybody. Baraujo, he had a 17-fight streak where he didn't take a loss. He's obviously very talented. He went, 5 rounds with Amalvov, who's probably about to fight for a title. So it's not to say these guys aren't good. They're seeing what happens when you get to the top of the UFC, and it's just, man, there's just no easy fights anymore,
Right. I think it comes down to recency bias. I'm seeing a lot of the chatter online, on Facebook and Twitter and all that stuff. And people are calling them the fighting frauds and stuff like that. They've all been exposed, fraud checked, and yada, yada, yada. And I don't really agree with that. I think that they just all happen to be rising up the ranks at a roughly the same pace and all face the same caliber of competition right around the same time, and then fell a little bit short. So Process lost to Ian Gary, who is, he only has, one loss on his entire record, if I'm not mistaken, and that was against undefeated Chefcat. You have Silva against, probably the next guy in line for the title, and Diego Lopes. Process has since then, come back with a devastating win. Hoofy is probably the one that has the biggest question mark next to his name because he hasn't had as many fights in the UFC, but still, you never know what this guy's potential is. And I'm actually a huge fan of Kaio. I think Kaio is actually ridiculously talented. He did come up short in that last fight. Let's see how he adjusts from here. I think that Kaio, unlike Jean Silva, actually has a lot of respect for his opponents, and it makes me have a lot of respect for him as well. Like, I noticed whenever he was having that fight with Imavov, there was a couple of accidental low blows, and you see, like, Kaio, when he realized he landed one, and before the ref even noticed it, he stopped and was like, hey, are we good? Do we need to separate? And that actually made me a bigger fan of him, that he was able to recognize stuff and actually make sure he was having a really good, clean fight. So I know I'm kind of on a tangent here on Kaio, but I'm just saying I am a fan of these guys. They seem like respectful people for the most part, other than Silva, who's kind of the lunatic of the group. It's like these guys are like the Ninja Turtles, and Silva's like Raphael. He's like the wild one,
Yes, indeed. That's actually a really good comparison right there.
Kaio would have to be Leonardo. He's like their leader.
He's the leader. That's very true. Who's Donatello?
Donatello's probably Hoofy. He's like the more reserved, chill one, And then Process is the one, like, he's like the Process is known for being like the chill smoker. Not that Michelangelo is a smoker, but like it's like the same kind of like it's like the wild guy who doesn't have a bad attitude, like Raphael kind of thing. So
makes sense. Free spirit is probably the best way to put it.
Right. That's a good way to put it. Yeah. So yeah, I actually disagree with all of the narrative right now on them being frauds and they're fraud checked and all that. I just think that they all made it to roughly the same position in the rankings and then faced, like, they went from fighting good fighters to great fighters. They fell a little bit short. Let's see how they adjust. There's plenty of time. They're all fairly healthy for now. It depends on how much Process wants to smoke,
Right. Very true.
Let's just see how they adjust from here and go from there.
Well, and I'm looking at the rankings, and I find it very interesting. Whenever you're in the UFC, you're an elite fighter. Whenever you have a ranking by your name, you're an elite fighter. But as the saying goes, there truly is levels to this, and whatever weight class you want to look at. When you look at 10 through 15, and then you look at like 6 through 9, and then you look at the top 5, there's just a big wide margin in between a lot of these spots. You see guys, you're like, man, that's a big drop off from this guy to that guy. They're still top 10 in the world, but again, there's levels, and you just notice when all these guys started getting into the top 10, that's when they started taking their losses. But there's no shame in losing to some of these. I mean, these are some of the guys that aren't even in the top 5. Paddy Pimblett, a lot of people think should have a title shot. You got Joaquin Buckley, who's been on a tear. Ian Machado Gary, of course, he looked great against Shavkat, and Shavkat's undefeated. And if that's his only loss, he's not even in the top 5. Robert Whitaker, Michael Page, there's tons of guys. And I mean, even like the next fight card that's coming up, you got Dominique Reyes. He's not in the top 5. He's looked good lately. You got people all throughout these divisions. And then you drop down just a little bit further, and you see guys like, I'm looking at Gabriel Bonfim, who's 14th. I've never heard of this guy. He's 14th in the world, though. So it just shows you, like, there's levels. You may not have even heard of some of these guys, yet you move up just a little bit, and it's like, wow, these guys are household names. So I think that's just what happened with the Fight Nerds.
All right. So, yeah, let's just see where they go from here. And, there's actually some other fights on this card, too, that we could discuss.
Sure.
Yeah. I mean, that main event was so good that some people forget that there are, like 12 other fights or something like that on this card.
Yeah, and for me, I will admit I am a huge MMA fan, but I'm also a college football fan, and college football is only around 3 months out of the year. Yeah, I guess 4 now with the extended playoff, but I do watch a lot of LSU. That's my team. So forgive me on some of these smaller cards, on some of these smaller fights. I don't necessarily have the locked-in focus that I should, but that's just one of my weaknesses I'm willing to admit.
Well, this card started a bit earlier. It wasn't like an overseas card where it started like way earlier, like Abu Dhabi. But I think because they had the boxing match later on, they pushed it back. Where I think the main card started around 3. So
yeah, John Anik was actually on the call. So yeah,
right.
Dana White's fully embracing the boxing.
Right. So I was out running some errands and doing some shopping with the family. So I didn't make it home until the very last prelim fight started. So I was able to watch that fight, and then I watched the rest of the main card. And it wasn't as exciting as last week's card that we talked about. That was surprisingly one of the best cards I've ever seen as far as exciting fights go. But this was still a pretty solid card. I don't remember too many fights that were that bad. I admit I didn't watch all the prelims, just that last one. But the fight that stuck out to me the most was Hernandez versus Fajeda. Did you catch that one? It was a second round TKO, but it was exciting.
I caught the end of it. Yeah, I caught the end of it. I wasn't able to actually watch all of it. I was doing a couple things, but once I got in the living room, turned it on, I had seen where Hernandez had knocked him out. But that was really all I saw. I caught the very end.
Yeah, so Hernandez had to weather a storm from Fajeda at first. It was not a one-sided fight. And if I remember correctly, this was Hernandez's hometown. Let me confirm that real quick.
San Antonio. Yeah. It was. I remember them saying that.
So it says he's born in St. Louis, but apparently, he went to college and lives in San Antonio. So this is like his home crowd. And I remember we about to see the hometown guy lose here because Fajeda was taking it to him. And Hernandez was able to weather the storm, and he came back with a really solid TKO in the second round. That was a very fun fight to watch. The fight before that, Santiago Luna versus Kwang Lee, that was also a really good one. It was only one round. Like it was just shy of 3 minutes in the first round, but those two went back and forth a good bit. I actually had Kwang Lee was winning the round overall, in my opinion. He was up, and then Luna rallied at the end and just came back with a really solid KO. So it was really fun to watch. Of course, you had Gastelum and Stoltz. I can't, man. These names, man. Stoltzfus. However you feel like pronouncing that, go.
Stoltzfus.
Yes. That was a pretty close match. Again, I'm a little confused at these cards, at these judges' scorecards, because I had it clear 29-28 because it was clearly, I'm just going to use his first name. Dustin clearly won 1 round, and Kelvin Gastelum clearly won 2 rounds. It's an easy 29-28. Yet one judge gave it 30-27. I don't know what that judge was on, but whatever. The right guy won, so I guess it doesn't matter. But again, some of these shady judges' scorecards coming through. Yeah, Rafa Garcia versus Jared Gordon. That's a third round TKO. I remember this one had a lot of back and forth as well. Overall, this is a pretty solid card. I don't know if we need to break down every single match, but I remember Hernandez versus Fajeda was a really fun one. Luna versus Kwang Lee was a really fun one. I'd say those are probably the most fun to watch, not counting the main event on the main card. And the one fight that I did see on the prelims, and that is Dusko Todorovic. Hopefully I'm saying that right, against Jose Medina. And Todorovic, that was a very, very, very impressive performance. It was a lot of wrestling and jiu-jitsu. He was taking the guy down. I would say it's more like jiu-jitsu style wrestling. It isn't like he was like shooting single legs and double legs. He's more like doing standing back takes and foot sweeps to get him down to the ground. And he would start working submissions, and Jose Medina would rally and get back up, and then Dusko would just take him down again. And eventually he wins by a rear naked choke. And I remember I was just so impressed with this guy's performance. He gave him so much pressure that I thought to myself, I'm going to have to keep an eye on this guy. So when I look at him, he's 13-6, which is a decent record. I look at his UFC record. He wins a few, loses a few. It doesn't look like he's had 2 wins in a row, so it's kind of surprising seeing how well he performed last night. But when I look at his record, he wins 1, loses 2, wins 1, loses 1, wins 1, loses 3, then wins 1. I was really impressed by his performance, but it looks like maybe he's not very consistent, so he needs to work on that. But it was pretty fun to watch. As someone who likes grappling and likes submission grappling, jiu-jitsu, I was pretty impressed by that performance. So if you want to go back and watch that one, if you like the submission game, watch that fight. That was pretty good.
Yeah, I'll have to check it out. Like I said, I wasn't able to really watch a lot, but I will go back and watch some of these fights, especially the ones you told me to, because I'm always trying to figure out who's the next prospect. I think that's one of the exciting things about the sport for a lot of people when they watch different things like Contender Series, for example. Who's going to be the guy to get the next shot? Who's going to be the next up and comer? People like to be ahead of the curve on that type of stuff. I know I do. So absolutely, I'll check that out.
Right. So that's pretty much all I had on this card. We actually don't have any fights next week, so we don't have anything to preview. But I think next week's podcast, we could take some time to do a preview of the following card. We could discuss that, and that's going to be Oberg versus Reyes, another fight night. UFC is just bombarding us with these fight nights. It seems like almost every weekend we have another fight night coming out.
Yeah, I believe they have 43 scheduled events in the year. So, yeah, there's only 9 weekends where you don't have anything. This is the second weekend off already in the last 4. And again, I think that might have something to do with football. They know there's some divided attention, so maybe they give them more of a break. And I do realize also they have a Christmas break, essentially, where the last couple of weeks of December and the first week of January, so they typically don't have any action. It's kind of like their reprieve. But for the most part, there's fights all the time. There's no shortage of action. There's no shortage of stars. The sport, a lot of people think needs more stars. I think we are transitioning into a time now where we are getting more stars. Ilia Topuria might be one big knockout away from being one of the biggest stars the sport's ever seen. I believe, as quick as people are to just sleep on people like Alex Pereira, who was a superstar himself, who had saved many cards just last year in 2024, UFC 300 being the big one. If he gets a win over Ankalaev, I think his stardom is right back intact. And so it's just exciting to see where the sport goes. But to have Oberg versus Reyes, just to talk about it briefly, to have that as the headliner of a fight night, I mean, that's really a pay-per-view worthy fight. And you get it for free. It's pretty cool, the depth that the UFC has these days. Maybe we don't have the top-heavy, syndrome like we did earlier in the sport's history. But, man, the roster is filling out nicely. That is a big-time fight, big-time implications. And, again, it's just a fight night. So, wow, that's pretty cool.
Yeah, that's actually what I thought about the Lopes Silva fight. I was like, how is this on a fight night card? This is absolutely pay-per-view worthy. But I think with being UFC Noche and for whatever reason they didn't have it as a pay-per-view this time, and they just want to have like a big name to headline it. So, and Diego Lopes is Brazilian, but he lives in Mexico, so he represents both. So, but still, it's another pay-per-view worthy fight that we got for free. So, we're going to have no fights next weekend. The following weekend is going to be the last fight night we have before UFC 320. That's going to be an event. I'm going to try to have a bunch of people over.
That's going to be an epic night. At least it should be. On paper, that's, in my opinion, the fight card of the year. You got multiple belts. And I always like to look at that feature fight as well. The feature fight being the third to last fight of the night, for those who don't know. That's going to be a banger of a fight. We got two guys in
Yuri Prochazka and Khalil Roundtree.
Yeah, we have two guys with Yuri Prochazka and Khalil Roundtree who don't know how to have a bad fight. They might lose, they might win, but it's going to be a big time knockout one way or another, 9 times out of 10.
See, hot take here. As great as those two title fights are, when you're just talking about from an entertainment standpoint, I'm more excited for that fight than I am the two title fights.
Yeah, I mean, understandably so. When you look at that Ankalaev Pereira, the first time they fought, it really was pretty boring. And I am a massive Pereira fan. I've heard different things, like he had a broken hand, he was sick. I don't know what's true, what's not true, but I do know he's had an extended time off. And of course, you can get hurt in training camp. We know that. But in theory, he should be healthy for this fight, or at least as healthy as a fighter could be with this much time between fights. So if he returns to Pereira that we know and love before he ever encountered Ankalaev, that could be fireworks. But I'm with you. That, to me, is the feature. The feature fight is the fight. I mean, entertainment guaranteed. I've never seen a boring Yuri fight. I've never seen a boring Roundtree fight. Somebody's going down. Yuri, of course, has a really good ground game, so maybe it does go to the ground. But for true fans of the sport, that doesn't make a difference. He mixes the martial arts as good as any of them. He went down to the mat with Teixeira, choked him out. Glover Teixeira, a great jiu-jitsu specialist himself, took him down there and finished a fight late for a championship. And, he loves to stand and bang. He brings it. He's a warrior. That's going to be an awesome fight. That card, I mean, top to bottom, it's not even just the top 3, but that entire card looks to be fireworks.
Yeah, this card is going to keep us really busy in a few weeks when we have to do a preview for this. We actually take some time to really break down every fight and talk about who we think is going to win, why they might win. That's going to be a big thing to discuss. And then, of course, after the fights happen, when we talk about the breakdown, it's going to be a really fun time. So you guys make sure you continue tuning into us so we could, continue
breaking it down.
Right. So that's pretty much all I have. We don't want you to go too far into these upcoming cards because that could just be for the future episodes. But man, this fight, you guys really need to go back and watch Diego Lopes, Silva, Jean Silva, Gene Silva, or as Bruce Buffer said, Jayon Silva. This guy has a million ways to pronounce his name apparently. So
yeah, much like all of his personalities, he has many different ways that he likes to be called.
For those of you that didn't know, and I discovered that this morning whenever I was getting ready to start recording this podcast episode, I was bringing up Jean Silva's information so we could have his stats and everything on tap ready to go to talk about it. When I bring up his Wikipedia page, it says Silva has an alter ego, a distinct identity that, according to him, manifests during his walkout, which he calls Lord or Lord Assassin. An alter ego. This dude is just nuts, man.
Yeah, I mean, I get like locking in, and they always talk about flipping the switch as an athlete, no matter what sport you're talking about. Once that cage door locks, you have to change who you are, and you don't have any friends, this, that, and the other. But yeah, he's just an oddball, in my opinion.
Yeah, he is. He's definitely the Raphael of the fighting nerds.
Without a doubt. That much we do know, so you're welcome for that knowledge, everybody.
Yes. Well, who's the Splinter?
Ooh, Master Splinter. That's... put me on the spot there.
I guess it would have to be like you'd have to actually know more about the Fighting Nerds camp and see if they have like their head coach or something. It would have to be who their head coach is. Yeah,
well, that's true. In theory, that's who it would be. That's who it would have to be. I wonder if he has any interesting techniques. They have different guys out there that have their interesting techniques. Dricus du Plessis, his coach, uses a horse prodder. Whenever he's doing something wrong, he just zaps him. I find that to be extreme.
That's really weird.
That is really strange, but he said he thrives on that, and he doesn't want to make mistakes because he doesn't want to get shocked. So, I mean, I guess it's effective, but wouldn't want to be my Master Splinter, I can tell you that.
No. Yeah, this definitely sounds like something I wouldn't want to do. I can only think of one thing in the world of combat sports that sounds just more ridiculous than that, and that is competing in Power Slap.
Sir, when are you going to compete in Power Slap?
Never. I had planned on making fun of Power Slap every single episode on this podcast. I completely forgot about Power Slap last week on the last episode. I completely forgot about Power Slap. Unfortunately, the rest of the world has yet to forget about Power Slap. I really wish they would. That's all I got to talk about this last event. Kind of a shorter episode today. Fight night. We don't have any fights coming next week, so nothing to preview. We broke down the important things.
Nope. Next week will be fun, though. It'll be fun to break down the implications again of that Reyes fight. I think that's going to speak volumes for their division. And then, of course, 320's looming after that. And we'll have plenty to say for that card. I can guarantee you that.
Neil Magny's on this card.
He is. I saw that. Fourth to last fight. Neil Magny fights all the time. What does he have? 40-something pro fights? He's been fighting
43.
There you go.
He just fought in August.
Yeah. He's turning around quick. I don't know what's up with that. And it's not like he's a younger guy, but credit to him, man. I like the active guys. Kevin Holland's one of my favorites. He may not win, but he's going to fight.
Yep. All right, that's all I got. So make sure you guys tune in next week, and we will discuss UFC Fight Night, Olberg versus Reyes.